Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Transition from becoming a listener to a listener supporter. Call 353-9528 or go to WJCT.org and pledge. Thanks.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and on today's First Coast Connect, it's the biggest stories of the week. Hurricane Helene brings catastrophic flooding to the Panhandle and knocks out power across the First Coast. The Jacksonville City Council approves a nearly $2 billion budget. Election officials promise extra outreach to voters deemed inactive. And weapons and student arrests continue to plague public schools. We'll talk about all that and more with our all-star panel on our Friday Week in Review. Plus, enhancing global perspectives through study abroad programs. Join the conversation. You can reach us on air at 904-549-2937. You can also email questions or comments to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or tag us on social media. It's all ahead this hour after today's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. Tropical Storm Helene is rapidly losing strength as it moves north of Atlanta. There's a flash flood emergency in that city. Flash flood warnings are up across Georgia, South Carolina, and parts of North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. Helene came ashore last night on the Florida Gulf Coast as a Category 4 hurricane. Tampa Mayor Jane Castor says parts of her city are underwater.
Throughout our downtown area, I was just driving down there, and there's a great deal of damage from the flooding. Barricades moved, construction trailers moved, and those were just the things that I saw in a very short drive.
Farther north, there are tornado watches for parts of North Carolina and Virginia. The National Weather Service says that so much rain is falling that there is the possibility of landslides. Former President Donald Trump says he will meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky this morning. NPR's Franco Ordonez reports Trump made the announcement yesterday.
Former President Donald Trump said he would meet with the Ukrainian president in New York.
President Zelensky has asked to meet with me, and I will be meeting with him tomorrow morning at around 9:45 in Trump Tower. And it's a shame what's happening in Ukraine. So many deaths, so much destruction. It's a horrible thing.
Trump has repeatedly said that he could end the war with Ukraine quickly, though he hasn't said how, and he accuses Zelensky of refusing to make a deal. The two men have a rocky relationship. Trump recently criticized Zelensky as being a great salesman who wants Democrats to win. The former president also accused Zelensky of making, quote, little aspersions toward him. Franco Ordonez, NPR News.
Zelensky met Vice President Kamala Harris in Washington yesterday. Today, Harris will visit the U.S. border in southern Arizona. New York City Mayor Eric Adams has arrived at federal court in New York this morning. He has been indicted on 5 criminal counts of corruption. New York Governor Kathy Hochul could exercise a power under the New York City Charter to remove Adams from office, but NPR's Eva Pukac reports New York governors have seldom used that power.
Hochul, speaking at an event in the Syracuse area, called the indictment shocking, and she says as governor she has a unique responsibility to do right by the people of New York.
I will be deliberative, I'll be thoughtful, but we're going to come to the right resolution on what to do in this moment. I want to reassure them that this is important to me, it's important to them, but their best interests are what drives me every single day.
The governor says she's reviewing her options and expects Adams to, quote, find an appropriate path forward. Federal prosecutors have charged Adams with bribery, fraud, and soliciting illegal foreign campaign donations. Eva Pukac, NPR News.
You're listening to NPR.
4 minutes after 9 now. This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. JEA is reporting just over 100,000 customers still without power after Hurricane Helene's wind and rain bands lashed the area overnight. In a Facebook post, the authority asked those without power to be patient as its crews work to restore power to our hospitals and shelters and police and fire stations. When JEA moves to phase 2, it will focus restoration efforts on individual customer outages. Now, some traffic signals are out or they are flashing. Remember to treat flashing red as a stop sign. If there's no lights on at all, treat that as a four-way stop. And if you have an outage you need to report, call JEA at 904-665-6000. Florida's price gouging hotline is active. Under Florida law, businesses may not drastically increase prices on essential items during a state of emergency. Attorney General Ashley Moody says businesses caught overcharging consumers will face fines.
If those prices are jacked up, we need you to let us know. We've already stopped some of these price increases in real time. That lets everybody get the supplies they need and be able to afford them.
Consumers who feel that prices on essential items have been increased in the past few days can contact the price gouging hotline. Gradually becoming mostly sunny this afternoon, reaching 90 degrees, very windy from the southwest with some gusts to 40 miles per hour. We are under a coastal flood warning.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Lisa, a mattress brand who believes good sleep should come naturally. Lisa donates mattresses to nonprofits across the U.S. to improve their communities. Learn more at leesa.com.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and it's Friday, which means it's time for our First Coast Week in Review. Among our topics, Dawn gives an early look at damage caused by Hurricane Helene's devastation. A nearly $2 billion city budget gets lawmakers' stamp of approval. Election officials pledge to notify inactive voters before they're removed from the voter rolls. And guns and threats continue to paralyze school operations. To talk about all that and more, I am joined by Tricia Booker, author, former reporter, and journalism professor at the University of North Florida. Hi, Tricia.
Good morning, Ann.
Thanks for coming in despite no power today.
Absolutely.
Will Brown, race and poverty reporter at Jacksonville Today. Will Brown.
Good morning.
Good morning. Nice to see you.
Great seeing you.
Dan Scanlan, reporter at WJCT News. Hey, Dan.
Hey, good morning.
And David Bauerlein, Metro reporter at the Florida Times-Union. Hey, David.
Good morning, Ann.
So, Tricia, I'm going to start with you. As a child of New Orleans, you know from hurricanes. From what we've seen so far, what do we know about the extent of Helene's damage?
I think it's fortunate that it didn't hit a more populated area, but I think the areas it did hit are pretty flattened and flooded. Fortunately, Tallahassee, I don't think took as big a hit as everybody was predicting, but those coastal areas, Apalachicola, Perry, I don't think we've seen the extent of what has been done there, but I think it's going to be a long, long time before they recover.
The storms that I saw, the chief meteorologist Tim Deegan cite when I was watching were Camille and Katrina, which are storms that you personally have experience with. Katrina had a 28-foot storm surge. I mean, we were talking about a 20-foot storm surge here. So comparable in some ways in terms of just the volume of water that they're seeing.
I think it's totally comparable. I mean, the thing with Katrina is that New Orleans, of course, was below sea level. And of course, it was just flooded for days and days, well, weeks on end. But in terms of the size of the storm and the force of the winds and the ability for it to really devastate an area, totally on the same par.
So the force of this is hard to describe, Will, when we're talking about, a single cubic yard of water weighs 1,700 pounds. And you're talking about a surge that's miles long, 4 yards high in some cases. I mean, it really is a powerful and an unstoppable force when it's happening.
Yes, it is. But I was a see will see you through student when it comes to science. So you started mentioning cubic yards, and I was like, oh, dear. This is my forte. But I've lived in Florida enough to know to not trifle with storm surge. And so when I hear those high numbers, that's always like the cue of, like, that to me is always the indicator of how severe a storm could be and how much damage it could have.
And so we are still, waiting, I think, to see the extent of the damage in the Panhandle and the Big Bend area. A lot of those areas, obviously, without power, but a lot of people here are also without power.
Yes, there are a lot of people without power. Dan has some of those numbers, but I can say that right before we got on air, I spoke with my favorite Tallahassee resident, my only younger brother, and he did not lose power. And that was a surprising blessing that I will accept.
Was he in Tallahassee?
Yes, he lives in Tallahassee, a little bit north of Hartsfield and High, but so north part of Tallahassee. He lives on a little bit of a hilly neighborhood, but didn't lose power. A couple branches were down. I mean, he literally called it like a Netflix and chill kind of night. So those are literally his words that I can say on air. But he's doing okay, and my nieces are doing okay. Now, not everyone in Tallahassee is doing the same, but I was pleasantly surprised to hear from him 20 minutes ago.
I mean, he must have been concerned that he had chosen not to evacuate. That was kind of against what the advice was.
It was, I was getting a little bit of pushback from some people in my family of, hey, you should talk to him since you're the older brother. I'm like, well, he's a grown man with kids and a mortgage. He knows what he's doing. But I'm thankful that he is okay. I have some other friends in Tallahassee I'm going to be hoping to hear from later today, but Tallahassee really was spared from what it could have been and what, frankly, they were expecting.
Yeah. So, Dan Scanlan, what about those numbers? What do we know about how many people remain without power?
Well, the last check is 21% of the customers, or about 112,000 plus, are affected with power outages. I'm one of them. We lost power at 10:30, came back on the south side, and it's out. Still 533,000 people are getting power, so that's a fairly decent number. What I'm intrigued at is that JEA has posted that they're in a Restoration 1-2-3 program, whereas emergency services and those that require power restoration will get it first, and then the customers will follow. They're asking for us to be patient. On my commute in from the south side along Beach Boulevard through San Marco, there were JEA crews out. There were a few trees down. And what most amazed me is it was a little messy in San Marco, but every road, including the usual suspects, as the mayor calls it, were open with only some minor signs of flooding. And I've seen some photos of trees down in Avondale, et cetera. So it looks like we dodged some fairly serious winds, but the winds that we had did cut some power.
Yeah, and Will, they have to basically focus on things like getting streetlights back up, making sure hospitals, the emergency centers have power.
Yes, that's exactly what JEA mentioned to me. Like, I spoke with JEA moments before I spoke with my brother. So this has been a prosperous morning already. But they said they sent crews out as early as 3 a.m. this morning. And they brought in about 200 line workers from out-of-state contractors as part of their 400 total line workers. And like you said, the grid, the police, fire, JFRD support is really is really what they know, is really what they're focusing on. And then they also mentioned that for the most part, they know about the outages. So if you live in San Marco or where Dan lives, they know that your home is without power right now. For the most part. So if your power is still out later, then maybe still call. But the calls are coming in, but they wanted to stress that they know the people who don't have power.
Well, JEA just texted me, and it says now 107,000 customers out. They've restored 120,000 so far. Lots, that's in caps, of trees down and damage, working as quickly as possible. Crews out 24 hours a day. They've got 54 additional contract crews brought in for over 400. So they are out there working.
I mean, certainly the homeowners know they're out because it is hot, it is humid, Tricia, and I understand there was a bit of a line at Starbucks this morning.
Yes, you can judge how many people are out of power by the people who are desperate at Starbucks for coffee. What I find really interesting is the number of people who were complaining via Facebook and social media about schools being out for Thursday and Friday because, of course, compared to the Big Bend area, we weren't expected to get very much at all. And I think that people don't understand how important it is for us to prepare for the worst. We can hope for the best, but we've got to prepare for the worst. And certainly it would not be appropriate for kids to be going to school right now with no power. And some of the schools have to be used as shelters. And I think we're really wise, and we've learned over the decades that you've got to prepare for what could happen. rather than just assume everything is going to work out.
You know, David Bauerlein, I was surprised to hear that some schools were really late to announcing a closure. And then some schools, like the University of Florida is one I know of, where they gave students 1 day. So for kids who are from Florida or maybe could evacuate, that's not real helpful. I mean, if you can only be off campus on that Thursday and you have to be back for class on Friday, you're really going to stay.
Yeah, it is surprising you wouldn't give more advance time given Florida's experience with hurricanes. The flip side of it is perhaps people are just still getting used to this idea that these hurricanes form out there and you don't see them halfway across the Atlantic Ocean coming your way. They really form with this rapid intensification, and people just have to get used to that now, that with the warmer waters out there, that what's not a hurricane becomes a hurricane and then becomes a category 4 hurricane in a matter of days. And so that's an adjustment, I think, in terms of what Tricia's talking about of planning for the worst. And, I will say, too, if you look at a satellite map of Florida at night and you see where there's just this line of lights encircling the state, and you think, what are the odds that this category 4 hurricanes are going to go through the one part of Florida where there's not a lot of development? Really been lucky. But look, Tampa had record high storm surge and it didn't get a direct hit. So there's some real lessons here about how vulnerable Florida is to these rapid intensification hurricanes that, yes, the forecast was really good, really well done, but you have to get used to this fact that a hurricane's going to be there in a matter of days, not weeks of planning in terms of seeing it coming.
Yeah,
It takes a little wobble.
We were very fortunate that there was a very accurate forecast in this case. But to your point, I mean, I spoke to a former colleague who's working in Tampa now, and all of their beaches communities are underwater. It's not maybe the devastation from the wind, but we all know the damage that flood causes, and it's enormous and a months, if not years long process to restore. So,
And the parts of that where the storm really hit, I mean, that was almost a similar path to what Adalia hit. Was it last year? Hasn't even been 2 years, right?
and Debbie also went right through there too.
3 times. Yeah, they're really
quick,
been crushed.
Quick update here. Looks like the Main Street Bridge is closed. FDOT was right in front of me as I was coming in. I'm waiting for confirmation on when and how long. And almost all of the departures at Jacksonville International have been canceled this morning. There's maybe 1 or 2 departing again because of everything else being hammered around us.
So this storm is on the move. It is out of Florida, but it is dumping rain on Georgia. It is headed to the mountains of North Carolina. They're expecting high winds as far inland as Indiana. It really is a seemingly new era of storm impacts. People are not able to just say, well, it's only Florida and it's not going to impact me here. And it's a changing narrative, Tricia.
Absolutely. My sister called me last night, actually, to tell me that there's another storm in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And I said, really? And she said, don't worry, we got this one. She's in New Orleans. But it is a changing narrative. Things happen. I mean, to David's point, I mean, it just went from a tropical storm to category 4 in a hot minute. And they have become, as good as forecasting has gotten, they are unpredictable. It just takes a tiny wobble and things could dramatically shift for vast areas of the state.
Well, we're obviously going to be keeping a close eye on storm developments and storm news. We are, I think, not on the radio this morning at this point. We are live streaming, and hopefully our transmitter will pop back on soon. But here at WJCT, we've got, same issues a lot of people are facing around town, which is dealing with some power outages and other technical issues. If you're just joining us, I'm talking to Dan Scanlan, Tricia Booker, David Bauerlein, and Will Brown about the week's biggest headlines. You can join our conversation at 904-549-2937, or you can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also comment on social media. You can watch our live stream on Facebook and the WJCT YouTube page. I want to move on now, David Bauerlein, and talk about an issue that you've been covering heavily, probably more hours than you care to. City budget was approved this week after, a long and difficult process as per usual. Was this the budget mostly that Mayor Donna Deegan wanted?
Most of what she wanted, definitely. I mean, there's this one person described this as very pro law enforcement, pro public safety budget. There's big raises in there for police, firefighters, corrections officers, additional police officers for the sheriff's office. So That was something she proposed. Council approved that. She got some money in there for some of the park projects she wants to do downtown, the Riverfront Park at the former site of the Landing, as well as some of the other parks up and down the that part of the downtown riverfront. She also got a big bump in funding for University of Health Jacksonville. So that's one that over the years there's been, the universities kept saying you're not paying enough. They really have jacked up that, doubled it really over the last 5 years. So that was something she got. What she didn't get was she was pushing for more money for fighting homelessness. She asked for $10 million. Council cut it down to $1 million. And she wanted more money for the affordable housing crisis. She wanted $10 million to match with some nonprofits in this program that would have, brought in like tens of millions of dollars for nonprofits. And the city council said no to that. They didn't think they had enough information to really make a good decision on that. So the problems aren't going away. And so the expectation would be that the mayor will come back later and try and get that funding during the budget year, but did not get it in the budget.
I want to come back to the homeless spending in just a minute, but I want to stick briefly with that UF Health funding because, as you say, there have been serious deficits in recent years. UF Health feeling very much starved for survival money, and they take care of the city's indigent, they take care of the city's jail population, they take care of trauma patients. So a very important health agent in the city. What is the role of UF Health's plan to build a campus here? Like, how do the politics of that play into this new infusion of money for UF Health?
I think indirectly it does have an impact. I mean, obviously there are two different projects. UF Health Jacksonville is the hospital. The University of Florida grad campus would be new, but it would have some overlap in terms of offering graduate programs in medical technology. I think the main thing, Ann, is just this idea that, the city is delivering this additional money to the University of Florida. It kind of bonds it. And the University of Florida, I think, is this institution that when they want to go in, they want to be all in. They don't want half measures. So, excuse me. So I think that does make a difference there for sure in terms of fostering that relationship.
And Dan, the public service first responder commitment, huge in this budget. Corrections officers going to see a 25% raise immediately. Police officers going to see about that much at least over the next 3 years. So a big bump in salaries. And, also for firefighters, going to see a return to pension. Is it surprising to anyone that this mayor has come in with such a strong commitment to first responders when that was not a group that backed her campaign or backed her politically?
I think she's getting some good support from the sheriff and vice versa. And I think the proof is in the pudding. We had 25 new officers signed in this week, including, I believe, the sheriff's own son. And according to what I'm hearing, they've got a few more classes ready to rock and roll. So they are well en route to filling the deficit of police officers. And I'm sure the inducement is the fact that there is the pension and the massive increase that goes on for 3 years in paycheck. I mean, that's a nice amount of money if you're a 25-year-old criminal justice student somewhere, and this could be a job, a career for you.
So, Tricia, to the homelessness spending, I want to touch on that because on Tuesday, the state law kicks in that basically makes public sleeping illegal in Florida. It makes it an arrestable offense. And, there are people who don't have anywhere to sleep because they're homeless. So this budget had included $10 million for affordable housing that that David mentioned. That was taken out of the budget. And then 9 of the $10 million that the mayor had proposed to respond specifically to this public camping ban were also removed. And so what is the city going to be doing to manage this state law when it goes into effect?
I think that's a really good question. The people I've spoken with who are homeless advocates are kind of gobsmacked. I mean, the state has basically said, you've got to solve this homelessness problem. You got to create an area where homeless people can go, where it's legal for them to go. And we have conservatively twice as many homeless people as we do beds for them. And so I think that people in the community have no idea what's going to happen. It's going to be illegal to be sleeping, illegal to sleep in your car, illegal to be camping when you're homeless. And like we were saying earlier, it's legal to be homeless. You just can't sleep. I mean, you just can't rest anywhere. I don't know. I think it's going to be this problem is going to encroach more and more on the city.
So one question I have about that, Will, I mean, to her point, the people who support this measure have said doesn't criminalize homelessness, but it certainly criminalizes one aspect of a human's life, which is sleeping. So if you're homeless and you don't have a place to sleep, it is sort of by default illegal.
How can someone live when they can't rest? Just a question I would ask. The one thing when I listen to Tricia, and I've done some of the reading, I haven't done a lot of reporting on this, is I wonder where the people are going to go. When I speak with people who live north and west of downtown, there's this concern that some unhoused people will just be foisted onto their community because they're not as affluent as other parts of Jacksonville. That's the question I have. Are we going to? And the second question is: are we going to actually just act like we don't have unhoused people? I mean, anybody who was just driving here yesterday and today, the only people I really saw in downtown were unhoused. Where are they going to go? So those are the questions that I have just as a person who reports the news on.
I would point out that one of the provisions of the state law makes it provides a way for people who think that there are too many homeless people in their area for a certain amount of time, whether they're sleeping or not, can literally sue the state to make that go away or for damages. So, I mean, it's not even just sleeping. It's just kind of hanging out, like you said, resting. I know that a lot of some of the solutions that have come at the beaches have been all private people who have voluntarily trying to help people gain shelter and eat. I just don't see very much government intervention here.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, Tricia. I know that Council Member Ron Salem said during the budget meeting that he thinks homelessness is beyond the role of government, Dan Scanlan, which I guess just raises the question, like, whose role is it? It's a matter of the private sector, of charities, of churches.
Well, the mayor's original plan had a lot of interconnectivity with the nonprofits and the churches, with the design to try to find better places for, and not just a tent city, as we've seen in major cities like New York that really didn't work, or putting them in hotels. And now $1 million won't go that far. And my question is, when the anti-camping law comes in, will police start arresting more of these people? Will our jail and our medical facilities through Baker acting or whatever suddenly fill up, which is going to be an extra added cost for them? Because, as Trish said, we see them. We've seen them yesterday and today. They're the only ones out there in this storm. I don't know if the solution has been met, and to have Ron Salem say thinking that ending homelessness is beyond the role of government is indeed, if your sheriff's office and your fire department are having to deal with them, then that's an extra budget.
Yeah. Although, David Bauerlein, there is no government in the United States that seems to have found a solution to homelessness. And I think, to Ron Salem's point, that is not necessarily something the government is going to sail in and solve. We've seen every city try to do that in its own way, and it has not worked. So it just really begs the question, what next? And whether these measures are funded immediately or funded further down the road, what will that solution look like?
Yeah, I think Ron Salem has talked about in some of the council meetings that he feels like the focus should be comply with the state law. And that means that if someone is sleeping on a sidewalk, for instance, the sheriff's office comes out there and they give them a choice between, going to jail, or they'd have some fire and rescue people who would take them to a homeless shelter. And I think the larger question is, can you really solve that problem of camping, sleeping in public spaces without solving the much larger problem of homelessness? And, or you just kind of like picking people up, they come back, pick people up, come back. What is, how do you ultimately get your arms around that? And to the extent that you want to be more bold or have a higher goal, then yeah, it costs more money to do that.
Well, that anti-soliciting law that came in a year ago seems to have had some effect. I'm not seeing people trying to sell or ask for donations as much on street corners, but they're still there, obviously, and they're still looking for money.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you just briefly, David, about the garbage fee. So that did not go up again this year, but as your paper has done some really good reporting on, those costs of picking up garbage and recycling far outstrip the money that is currently set aside to provide those services. No momentum at all to try to make that fee is sufficient to provide those services?
No, there's not. And it's sort of one of those things where it's kind of like, well, we need to do it after you. No, after you. And so there's nobody out there who's really taking the lead. The mayor's office has not said, we're going to get it done. City council members have not said, we're going to initiate it. It's a fee. Nobody wants to be the person who raised a fee, even though other cities have done this repeatedly. Jacksonville hasn't done it since 2010. And it's taking a lot of money from the general fund, which is property taxes, to subsidize that service, which, maybe that's good. Maybe that's bad. Maybe it's not a bad thing if you're a low income person that property taxes are helping you to not have to pay a higher fee, a garbage fee. But it really is, structurally, it's a big cause of the deficits that the city is facing.
In terms of budget, I want to continue talking about it, but if you're interested in joining our conversation, you can reach out at 904-549-2937. You can email comments or questions to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. We are talking budget. One element of the budget, Will Brown, was the job that dare not speak its name. It is the position of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Chief, formerly the title held by Parvez Ahmed. He was Deegan's chief of DEI. He no longer is. The city stripped out the ability for her to spend on DEI initiatives. So now he has a different title. It's a data analyst of some kind.
I spent Tuesday night, instead of being a dad and watching my child's fencing practice, listening to the city council spend an hour bickering about one position in the mayor's office. And it was that position. Here we are as a city and a country. It was an interesting listen to hear, well, we don't want to fund DEI. Well, some members of the city council saying, well, we don't want to fund DEI. Well, we already took this position out of the budget. It was a lot of bickering for one position. I guess there was a Councilmember Rockman Johnson introduced a floor amendment, which would have added to the number of people that Mayor Donna Deegan could have on her staff. I think she can have 22 now, but this additional would have given it 23. It didn't really go anywhere. But the idea that all because it was just this one person and this one position, for lack of, I usually don't try to give my opinion here, but it seemed like a tremendous waste of our time to spend that kind of time on a night when a $1.7 billion budget was going to be approved to discuss how much somebody who at their most might make $250,000. It's literally a drop in the bucket.
One last item I want to talk about when it comes to money is the Jaguars. So this budget comes on the heels of this historic agreement that the mayor worked out with the Jaguars leadership. It is expensive. It involves a new stadium, but it locks the team down. And now we own them, and they're not doing great. So I'm curious, how is it a convenient thing that deal went through before this season began? Will?
So it doesn't, for me, it doesn't matter. They were either going to do the deal or not, whether they were 3-0 or 0-3. It was going to get done. Now, I found it really. I mean, yes, the Jaguars' offense is pitiful right now. I'll say all my jokes are off air, but I was speaking with a University of Michigan professor yesterday, literally, and she mentioned that the amount of money that municipal governments pay to support NFL stadiums is very connected to market size. The New Yorks, the Chicagos, the LAs are not going to spend as much on a stadium as a Jacksonville, an Indianapolis, a Cincinnati will, frankly, because those other large markets have the ability, and Dallas is a large market too, because everybody loves or hates the Cowboys. But those large markets have the ability to raise more revenue, as opposed to Jacksonville. And so that's always been the thing that Jags have mentioned is we're always trying to raise more local revenue, and they believe that the stadium renovation will help do that. But it also means that smaller NFL cities like Jacksonville, like Cincinnati, like Tennessee, like Nashville, have to spend more money. New Orleans, Tricia's city, probably is a little bit different because they're spending state money. That's the difference between Jacksonville and some of these other places is that we're spending. It's all a local project. Buffalo, Tennessee, New Orleans, they're all getting state money in addition to local money.
And Florida doesn't allow that.
Florida doesn't do that anymore.
Right. Well, we own them one way or the other, David Bauerlein. I mean, maybe it builds a fan base more akin to the Green Bay Packers, when you have this investment in a team.
They win.
They do, but they haven't always, and they've always had very, very faithful fans.
Yeah, if you're a casual fan, maybe you say, "Gee, I don't know. Should we really commit to 30 years to a team that I don't care about in December because they're already out of playoff contention?" I mean, but I think Will's right. The bigger issue was we're an NFL town. We want to be an NFL town. That was the motivation. It probably helped that they were to the playoffs 2 seasons ago and kind of were in contention, and they have a franchise quarterback and all that. But I think ultimately it was really not so much the one-loss record, which has not been good for a decade, as it was just, we like the idea of saying there's an NFL team in our town.
It was perhaps a little early to rename the stadium Trevor Bank Stadium.
Wasn't that interesting?
I just want to welcome back our listeners on air. We had our transmitter was out for a little bit, but thanks so much for sticking with us. We are talking with our panel of journalists on our Friday Week in Review. I'm talking to Will Brown, Dan Scanlan, Tricia Booker, and David Bauerlein, and we've been talking budget. I want to talk about money still, Will, but I want to switch gears to talk about elections. This is a story that you've been reporting on about, and you were the first to report on. This city council actually approved some money to address this issue. So remind us, for people who may not be up to speed, what was the issue with voters being rendered inactive?
So in the state of Florida, there were some new election laws that have been passed in recent years, which meant that if the supervisor of elections office did not have a way to contact you through your address, and you didn't participate in a couple of federal general elections, which is presidential elections, then you might be removed from the voter rolls. And that number heading into the August primary was 94,000 people. Heading into the early September, it was down to about 90,000 people. It's now down to about 88,000 people. So people are getting their address information updated with the supervisor of elections. Now, what happened on Tuesday night was there was an additional $25,000 allocated to the supervisor of elections office so that they could reach some of those inactive voters through phone numbers and email addresses that they already filed with the supervisor's office, because the thinking might be if someone's moved their address, they might not have a physical address, but phone numbers don't change, email addresses don't change, and so they're going to reach out that way. And then there's an additional, I think, $7,000 of that 25 to reach out to people through black media like the Florida Star, and other black newspapers, as well as Spanish-speaking media, which is like magazines, newspapers, and radio, to encourage people to update their address information so they can become an active voter once again.
Yeah, and so your original reporting found that it was basically 15% of registered voters in Duval had become labeled inactive, and that reporting sparked some concerns. There was a couple of groups, including the League of Women Voters in Duval, that appealed to the supervisor of elections office and said, hey, we feel like something more needs to be done about this.
And the supervisor appealed to the city council. He made that ask to the city council for some additional funding to reach out to voters. And to be transparently clear, yes, there's an overrepresentation of black and Hispanic voters. Yes, the percentage gap, I think, was about 10% difference in terms of more registered Democrats were inactive in 2020 and then Republicans, and now it's 18%. However, the supervisor of election, Jerry Holland, has said repeatedly and consistently he wants everyone who's eligible to vote to vote. He didn't say party, he didn't say race, he didn't say socioeconomic status. He said, if you are eligible, I want you to vote. And Holland has said that he believes that the best way to get people registered to vote is to be able to connect with them. He also specifically mentioned that if you are concerned about your status as an active or an inactive voter, and there's a link to whether you are an active or inactive voter on our website, Jax Today, that vote early, because that way you're still a registered voter, and by voting early, you can vote at any precinct in Duval County, regardless of where your address is in Duval County. And you can get your address resolved by voting early. But if you try and wait till election day, that's where you might run into problems, because you can only vote at your precinct. So if you have any concern about being an inactive voter, vote early, and that way you can get that resolved when you vote early.
And early voting starts on October 21st. Is that right? That Monday?
I thought it was 26th.
It's a great question that
I'm
I
gonna
should know
see if
the
my-
answer to.
See if maybe my producer can check on that. David, some people blame this on Senate Bill 7050, which had included some tough election reforms in the state of Florida. I guess there was a little bit of grumbling at the budget meeting about whether or whether this was an appropriate expenditure coming too late. What was the concern there?
Yeah, there was just the idea that it's coming on budget night. If this was an issue, it should have come up during the budget workshops when they were actually looking at that budget. Of course, Will's reporting came up after that, and so they're reacting to a valid, well done reporting that moved the needle on that. There's all the election reforms or crackdowns. I don't really understand, quite frankly, why someone who just chooses not to vote risk is losing, becoming an inactive voter. Is there some larger problem this is correcting? I mean, if someone registers to vote and decides not to vote in a couple of general election cycles, well, that's their right as an American not to vote too. And that shouldn't have them to go through hoops just to be able to do it when they do decide they go and cast a ballot.
And to be fair and transparent, like usually when you vote, then that's when you usually update your address, because when you go in to register, they say, is this your address? And you confirm, this is my address. And so that is how, so Holland has said, oh, well, it's not that people don't vote, it's that we can't confirm their address. But when you go to vote, you're confirming your address. Thus, you're eradicating the issue of the supervisor's office having a valid address for you. So it's more about addresses and not about voting. But when you vote, you obviously are saying, hey, I live here, and I affirm that I live here.
Well, it does. I think you're right, David. It does seem to be kind of a trend, a larger trend, not just in Florida, but across the country, that is making it a little more difficult to vote. I mean, I don't think we can deny that it is becoming harder for people, particularly people who live in urban areas, perhaps, to vote. I mean, I tell you what, in Ponte Vedra, I have to wait about 3.5 seconds to vote. I know that there are parts of Jacksonville where people are going to be waiting for hours and hours to vote, and to get up there and then have to kind of prove that you are registered to vote. I don't know. To me, it is definitely and perhaps not an organized effort, but it is leaning toward a trend of making it more difficult for people to vote.
My producer, Stacy, did chime in. Early voting in Duval County does start October 21st. And to Will's point, that is going to solve a lot of problems. I want to move on now to the topic of school threats. It's a story that Dan Scanlan has been covering this week. But if you would like to join our conversation, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937, or you can email questions or comments to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. And you can also reach out on social. Dan Scanlan, this problem of school threats, school lockdowns, student arrests just seems to be continuing apace.
After the incident in Atlanta about a month ago, we saw a large increase in threats in schools all over the First Coast. Children as young as 11 in Flagler, Putnam, Nassau, St. John's and Duval, and a number of arrests, a lot of arrests. But then earlier this week, the threat became a little more real when a student at Englewood High School, who apparently had a crime issue, a police report on him, was found on campus. The school police brought in a dog, and they found an AK-style weapon, an AR-style weapon, and 2 loaded handguns, a ski mask, and gloves in his vehicle. And so the presumption is that something was planned more than just, I don't know what was happening. The next day, because of that at Englewood, there was a lot of scared kids, and it was on lockdown because of the rumor of a threat of a school shooting. So that was a real incident. School district would not respond as to what they thought was happening or their response to the level of armament that was in this vehicle on campus. But that is a little scary to think of that amount of firepower at a major high school in Duval County.
And that's different when you say it's a real threat, because a lot of the ones that we've been talking about in these high-profile arrests of 11-year-olds have been online or, text threats. They've been verbal threats. They have not involved, to our knowledge, necessarily caches of actual real weapons.
The only weapon, quote unquote, was a banana that a little girl pointed at someone and went pew pew.
Well, there was also, I think, a number of kind of knives and swords
some
and
photos that were
airsoft
sent, yes.
guns that were, which
But those are photos. This was 3 weapons in a vehicle that was found by a search dog, and they were fully loaded. And one of those was an assault-style rifle, which, again, is fairly common on the streets, but still, a 17-year-old has it, and no explanation as to where they came from. Was this young man selling them for his father, or was there something else nefarious in there? I don't know.
David, I know a lot of people have been trying to figure out, is this an actual increase? Is this just an increased response? Is this just law enforcement trying to publicize their response to get people to take it more seriously? But the folks that I've spoken to in law enforcement have said this is an actual increase. We are seeing a flood at just a kind of a new day in terms of the threat that exists. And yet a lot of young kids caught in the system. I know that they refused bail to the 11-year-old down in, I think it was in Flagler County, despite a number of people, a couple dozen people showing up, his mother speaking on his behalf. They refused to let him out.
Yeah, and that was one where it was, I guess, a hoax, and trying to make an example of that to deter people, young people, from doing something like that. And it does seem like it's happening more and more of these school shootings. I remember when Columbine happened, it was just one of those chilling effects where you kind of felt like it's never going to be the same again. And that really hit deep with people. And now, we see these continued incidences of sometimes hoax, sometimes these plots are foiled by good law enforcement work, but there's never a way to stop all of them. And it just feels like every school year somewhere in this country, we're going to read about something like this happening.
I was in high school when Columbine happened, and that was wild. I still remember some of the things that were happening around that time because I was a freshman in high school. But the incident that really opened my eyes to this could happen was there was a shooting in Arkansas. I want to say a couple years before that, an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old, and they killed a teacher and a few others. And I was about their age. And I said, who would do that? Are you serious? Who does that? And clearly there were people who did. But to your point, post-Columbine, high school was, you didn't make jokes. You didn't do all sorts of stuff like that because and this is the pre-social media era. This is where before people had cell phones or where you could mass communicate in rapidly like you can now. So I can only imagine that the blessing of being able to spread information rapidly is also in some ways a curse because you can spread information and threats.
And some school districts
rapidly.
are now mandating that students are not allowed to carry cell phones, that they end up getting locked up before and after school. So students will not have that mass social media ability.
I just want to make a note. My producer is saying that AT&T is experiencing outages that are currently affecting JSO's non-emergency line. So just be aware of that. People with a non-emergency that doesn't involve law enforcement necessarily, but is storm-related, can always call that 630 city number in order to get some assistance and to get some awareness to whatever the problem is. Dan Scanlan, I just briefly want to talk about Arthur Crofton, who is a legendary radio voice in this market. Well known to people who've lived here for a while, but for people who didn't know him and didn't listen to him and perhaps are new arrivals, remind us of who Arthur Crofton was.
Arthur
He
Crofton
passed away, we should say.
He died 2 days ago, and Arthur Arthur was 30 plus years on the radio in Jacksonville. He was a noted host. He did many fundraising events. He actually was the co-host of our WJCT TV auction for a number of years. And I got the pleasure and honor of working with him as a backup radio news guy some mornings at the station he was at, Light 96.1. A wonderful, warm, funny guy, a Yorkshireman who had this lovely cultured accent. And I actually corresponded with him 3 weeks ago on text. He was in England, not feeling well, and said he was coming home feeling better. And I gather he passed away, and I found out there is a funeral planned next week, which I will certainly be part of. And speaking about British stars, just learned that Maggie Smith passed away at age 89. So not a good week for the gentle Brits that we have known.
Yeah. Well, our thoughts go out to the family of Arthur Crofton, obviously a beloved voice in Jacksonville, and will be fondly remembered. I want to thank you all for being here today. That is our roundtable. David Bauerlein, Will Brown, Dan Scanlan, Tricia Booker, thank you all so much for being here and weighing through the storm and putting up with the power outage and all of that. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ann.
Up next, engaging students in world affairs through global learning.
Scenic Jacksonville presents the annual Great Cities Symposium on October 10th. Speaker Carol Coletta has led the transformation of downtowns, parks, and riverfronts across the U.S., from Memphis to Chicago. Join the community conversation. Tickets available at scenicjacksonville.org.
This week on Science Friday, the story of an unusual fish, the sea robin, that hunts for hidden prey by tasting with its 6 legs.
It's a very clear behavior. Anyone can appreciate it. It's this, weird animal, weird trait. So let's try and figure it out.
That's on Science Friday from WNYC Studios.
This afternoon at 3, here on WJCT News 89.9.
Hi, I'm Domenico Montanaro, Senior Political Editor and Correspondent for NPR, where responsibly covering the presidential election means consulting many sources. We put hard questions to the campaigns, pundits, and experts. We carefully analyze polls. But most importantly, we listen to voters, seeking out varied perspectives on the issues that matter most. You can support NPR's coverage today by giving to this station. Thanks.
Please call 353-9528 or visit us at wjct.org/radio.
A scathing report raises new questions for the Secret Service.
No operable radio, no drone detection system, no counter surveillance unit.
Eric Adams becomes the first sitting New York City mayor to face criminal charges, and in Florida,
oh yeah, I'm very worried.
Millions brace for the impact of Hurricane Helene. We get to all of it on the Roundup next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Perspectives and diverse cultures. That's the goal of the International Education Conference. It's an annual event at Florida State College at Jacksonville South Campus. And here to tell us about this effort to boost international study is Cindy Robinson, conference organizer and director of the Center for International Education. Welcome, Cindy.
Good morning.
Good morning. And Lourdes Norman McKay, director of FSCJ's Diplomacy Lab program. Hi, Lourdes.
Hi.
Lourdes, we've talked about the Diplomacy Lab on this program before, but for those who aren't familiar or maybe don't remember, remind us what it is, what it does, why it's unique.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, it's a public-private partnership between the U.S. Department of State and academic partners. And we're very pleased that FSCJ is the first and so far only workforce-focused school that is a partner through the Diplomacy Lab program. And academic institutions in the U.S. can qualify to apply to become a partner. And then once they are a partner, then the State Department can source projects to the faculty and students at that institution to pursue and actually to help shape American foreign policy.
And so these students are able to work kind of with the State Department on some priorities that they have, but they do it as a student. They can do research, they can do examinations of different cultural challenges that places are having, and then make recommendations to the State Department about solutions.
Exactly right. And they're real world problems. So they're coming from offices, embassies, bureaus within the State Department, And now also U.S. Treasury has added some projects to that for counterterrorism stuff. And they do present their findings to the State Department officials. And often those things then go forward and have an influence on the policies in those areas.
And so it's worth pointing out, you say it's a workforce college. A lot of the, FSCJ used to be known as a community college. It is now a state college, but the goal of those schools is to be affordable, to be accessible, and, having an opportunity to connect with really high profile or well-connected people in the State Department, for instance, or in international studies, is an opportunity that sometimes isn't afforded to schools that are, like state schools. It's sometimes more rarefied universities. And so it really is unusual and special that the students have this connective opportunity.
Absolutely. And that was actually one of the things that we mentioned in our application to the State Department about the importance of involving the community and state colleges in these kinds of partnerships, because at the end of the day, over half of U.S. citizens who do get a college degree of some sort come through state and community colleges at some point. And so it is a very important part of touching, the American citizens, rather than, like you said, just focusing on the traditional, tier one institutions for research.
Yeah, and certainly some of the best reporters I know and some of the best professionals I know attended FSCJ. So, Cindy, this event that's coming up, it's put on by the Center for International Education. And so this is a way to platform the Diplomacy Lab in part, but also a study abroad opportunity. Is that right?
Yeah, the center really focuses on bringing global perspectives and global opportunities to faculty, staff, and students within the college. And so every year we have the conference, and our theme this year is Study Abroad at FSCJ, because earlier in the spring we launched our Study Abroad program, and we started with a service trip to Puerto Rico, where we had students go into the community and do work as a community service project. And we had a political science course in May go to London and Wales. And so now next year we're excited. We're using this conference as a platform to launch our Study Abroad program. We're partnering with Diplomacy Lab projects to go to South Africa in May for 16 days and do some work and visit the consulate and actually get hands-on for some of the work that one of those Diplomacy Lab projects is actually involved in. So
interesting. So students who are doing this State Department sponsored research in South Africa can actually do some of that research on the ground on this study abroad trip.
Yeah, it's a real good follow-up. We're going to go to several different areas of South Africa. We also have our interior design group going to France. So this is a good opportunity for study abroad for our students. We know that less than 2% of community college students study abroad. And so we're trying to do our part to bring study abroad.
And so if students at the school are perhaps, financially challenged or have other, lifestyle situations, if they've got a family, if they've got children, sometimes it can be difficult for them to certainly afford, I would think, to study abroad. So are there any programs in place to help kids connect with that opportunity, to finance it, to find housing, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, for us, we're trying to develop programming that is sometimes as short as 7 days and as long as 16 days to kind of give a variety for people to afford and take off work. And then also, our foundation has been very supportive to help offset some of the cost. We're reaching out to community members who want to donate and provide that opportunity to our student body and our faculty and staff. So study abroad is definitely something we're focusing on as part of this broader conference, which is focused on Diplomacy Lab and international topics as well.
All right. Well, you can find out more information about that at the Diplomacy Lab site in the FSCJ website. Cindy Robinson, Norman McKay. Sorry about that. Thank you both so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having
Thank you.
All right. And join us Monday.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Personal Injury and Wrongful Death Law Firm. Serious injury cases are complex, and civil trial attorneys present the evidence juries need to see and hear. More at waynehogan.law.
This is WJCT News